A mysterious granite monument once stood silently in a Georgia field. Who built the Georgia Guidestones, and why did someone destroy them with explosives? This was one of America's greatest modern mysteries, a structure inscribed with a radical blueprint for humanity's future before it was suddenly reduced to rubble. Today, you will learn the complete, untold story of its creation and its shocking demise. We will follow the trail of a man using a false name, uncover the 10 cryptic commandments etched into stone, and investigate the shadowy group that claimed responsibility for its destruction. What does the legacy of these mysterious stones say about our own world? One morning in March of 1980, the residents of Elberton, Georgia, woke up to a sight that defied all explanation. A colossal granite monument now stood in an empty field where nothing had been before. 5 massive slabs, each weighing over 20 tons, were arranged with astronomical precision, crowned by a heavy capstone. It was as if the earth itself had given birth to a modern-day Stonehenge overnight. The local newspaper was flooded with calls, and soon national news outlets descended upon the small town, all asking the same bewildering question. Where did this come from? The answer began not with the stones themselves, but with a mysterious visitor months earlier. A well-spoken, elegantly dressed man arrived in Elberton and introduced himself as Robert C. Christian. He walked into the office of the Elberton Granite Finishing Company and presented detailed architectural plans for a project of staggering scale and complexity. He claimed to represent a small group of loyal Americans who wished to remain anonymous forever. Money, he assured them, was no object. The entire endeavor was funded through a series of cashier's checks, creating a perfect financial veil around the true sponsors. The local granite company, though initially skeptical, proceeded with the secretive commission, fabricating and assembling the enormous stones under a cloak of silence. The result was an instant sensation, a puzzle of epic proportions erected in plain sight. Who were these loyal Americans, and what message were they so desperate to deliver that they built a monument meant to outlast humanity itself? At the heart of the Georgia Guidestones lay the true enigma, carved for all to see. Across the 4 main pillars, 10 directives were inscribed in 8 modern languages like English and Spanish, and 4 ancient scripts including Babylonian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics. This was not a casual message, but one designed to speak across cultures and millennia. The first guide was the most startling and the one that would fuel endless debate. It read, "Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature." To a world with a population already exceeding 4 billion at the time, this seemed less like a goal and more like a cataclysm. How could such a balance be achieved? Was it a hopeful vision for a distant, sustainable future, or something far darker? The following guides built upon this foundation. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, suggested a form of managed eugenics that made many deeply uncomfortable. Unite humanity with a living new language, hinted at a future global order where old divisions were erased. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason, seemed to place cold logic above the warmth of human spirit and culture. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts, offered a more universally accepted ideal of global justice. The remaining guides called for letting all nations rule internally while resolving external disputes in a world court, avoiding petty laws and useless officials, balancing personal rights with social duties, prizing truth, beauty, and love, and finally, a stark warning not to be a cancer on the earth but to leave room for nature. Taken together, these 10 messages painted a picture of a future that was either brilliantly utopian or chillingly authoritarian, depending on your point of view. For some, they were a noble, if radical, environmentalist plea for stewardship and global cooperation, a set of instructions to rebuild civilization after a hypothetical collapse. For others, they represented a sinister agenda for mass depopulation and a new world order governed by an unaccountable elite, a stone-bound manifesto that valued abstract ideals over human life. The mystery of the builders was now inextricably linked to the meaning of their message. What kind of person or group would inscribe such a controversial blueprint onto stone, intending it to last for ages? The answer seemed to lie in the one man who dared to show his face, the enigmatic Robert C. Christian. The languages carved into the granite were a declaration of intent all by themselves. This was not a message meant for a single country or culture. It was a blueprint intended for the entire world and for the distant future. To achieve this, the Guidestones spoke in 8 modern languages, a chorus of global voices. An English speaker, a Spanish speaker, someone who understood Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, or Russian could all approach the monument and read the same 10 directives in their own tongue. But the builders looked even further back, etching the same message into the stone in 4 ancient and scholarly scripts: Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. This was a profound and deliberate choice. It connected the message to the very cradle of civilization, to the roots of law, philosophy, and spirituality. The linguistic feat itself was staggering. This was not a simple translation done by a computer program. In the late 1970s, such technology was primitive. Each inscription, especially the ancient ones, would have required expert linguists, perhaps even academic specialists, to ensure the glyphs and characters were perfectly and accurately rendered. A single misplaced wedge in a cuneiform inscription or a wrong symbol in a hieroglyphic cartouche could have rendered the message meaningless, turning a profound statement into gibberish for future scholars. The sheer cost and coordination involved in this multilingual project points decisively away from the idea of a lone, eccentric individual working from his basement. This was the work of a group, one with significant financial resources and deep, perhaps even academic connections. They possessed not just the wealth to fund such an elaborate project, but also the scholarly network to execute its most intricate detail with flawless precision. So who were these unseen architects, and what clues did the one man who represented them leave behind? The stones themselves held secrets beyond the words etched on their surfaces. This was not merely a monument of philosophy, but a sophisticated piece of engineering, an astronomical instrument designed to mark the passage of time with celestial precision. A narrow hole drilled straight through the center pillar was perfectly angled to frame the North Star Polaris on any clear night, transforming the entire structure into a giant fixed compass. This was the anchor point, the unchanging reference in the northern sky. Another slot, carefully carved through the capstone and aligned with one of the supporting slabs, was positioned to capture the rising sun on the days of the solstices and equinoxes. Each year, as the sun reached its extreme northern and southern points in the sky, and again as it crossed the celestial equator, a beam of light would pierce this slot, marking these pivotal moments in the Earth's journey around the sun. A separate channel was carved to track the noonday sun, casting a beam that would indicate the exact date. Imagine standing there on a crisp autumn equinox, watching a sliver of sunlight appear precisely where the architect said it would, just as it had for centuries. This was a functioning calendar, a clock, and a compass, all carved from granite. Why include such complex and permanent celestial tracking? It was a masterstroke of symbolism. By rooting their message in the immutable laws of the cosmos, the builders were lending their 10 guides an air of scientific and almost sacred authority. The stars and the sun were not matters of opinion or political debate, they were eternal truths. The monument was saying, our words are as fundamental as the celestial cycles themselves. This was a message meant to be read not just by the people of the 20th century, but by whoever or whatever might find these stones in a distant future, long after our current languages are forgotten. The astronomical features were a universal language, a silent, enduring testament to a grand and mysterious vision for humanity. Rising above the four granite pillars, the massive capstone held its own secrets. Etched across its four sides were shorter, more enigmatic phrases, but this time only in the four ancient languages. When translated by scholars, each carried the same profound weight. In classical Greek it read, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason." Babylonian cuneiform echoed the sentiment, while Sanskrit and Egyptian hieroglyphics completed the message. This was the monument's true title and its ultimate ambition, a hope that future generations would look upon this structure not as a religious icon, but as a foundation for a world governed by logic and enlightenment. Yet the most tantalizing secret lay not on the stone but directly beneath it. A simple, square slab set into the ground at the base of the monument bore a short inscription. It stated clearly that a time capsule was buried 6 feet below that spot. The plaque gave 2 dates, the date the capsule was buried and a space for the date it was to be opened. But that second date was left entirely blank. This was a mystery box planted in the earth, its intended audience and its contents a complete unknown. Why leave the opening date blank? Was it meant to be opened after a specific global catastrophe, or perhaps 1,000 years in the future when the age of reason had finally dawned? No official records from the builders ever surfaced to document what they sealed inside. We can only speculate. Perhaps it contained the true identities of Robert C. Christian and his group, a letter to the future explaining their radical vision, or even scientific data and cultural artifacts they deemed essential for a rebuilding civilization. The existence of this empty date and unopened box amplified the enigma, transforming the Georgia Guidestones from a mere monument into an ongoing conversation with a future we may never see. What message was so important that it had to be hidden in plain sight, waiting for a moment that never came? The one tangible thread in this entire mystery was the man who called himself Robert C. Christian. He was not a ghost, but a carefully constructed persona, a single point of contact between the unseen architects and the physical world of granite and machinery. His primary confidant was Wyatt Martin, the president of the Granite City Bank in Elberton, who became the financial intermediary for the entire project. Martin was the only person who ever claimed to know Christian's true identity, a secret he vowed to carry to his grave. He described Christian as a gentleman, articulate and poised, with a commanding knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and architecture. This was not some backwoods eccentric, but a man who carried himself with the quiet authority of an academic or a high-level professional. Money flowed without hesitation through cashier's checks, confirming that Christian represented a group with immense, untraceable financial resources. So who was he really? The name Robert C. Christian itself is widely believed to be a pseudonym, a direct reference to Christian Rosencreutz, the legendary founder of the Rosicrucian order, a centuries-old esoteric tradition focused on spiritual wisdom and the betterment of society. This connection fuels one of the most persistent theories, that the Guidestones were a project of the Rosicrucians or a similar Hermetic group, attempting to seed a new age of enlightenment through a permanent public monument. Their philosophy often blends spiritual pursuit with scientific reason, which aligns perfectly with the Guidestones' call for an age of reason. Other theorists look toward different secret societies with a globalist vision, groups that advocate for a unified world government and managed populations. Could Christian have been a front for an influential club of intellectuals, financiers, or futurists who believed they possessed the blueprint for saving humanity from itself? The very fact that he chose a bank president as his sole confidant is a masterstroke of practical secrecy. A banker is bound by professional discretion and understands the mechanics of moving large sums of money quietly. Wyatt Martin was not just a helper, he was a strategic component of the plan, a human vault for the project's single biggest secret. This level of forethought confirms that Robert C. Christian, whoever he was a brilliant logistical operator. He left behind a monument of granite but ensured that the trail of human identity ended with one aging banker and a promise. This deliberate erasure of self raises the most haunting question of all. Was his anonymity an act of pure humility, a belief that the message was all that mattered, or was it a necessary precaution for a group whose radical vision for the future would inevitably attract fury and fear? This single vow of silence held by a small-town banker became the ultimate lock on the mystery. Wyatt Martin was a pillar of his Elberton community, a man whose entire career was built on trust and discretion. When the elegant stranger calling himself Robert C. Christian walked into his bank, Martin recognized this was no ordinary client. The architectural plans were complex, the funding was substantial, and the demand for absolute secrecy was non-negotiable. Christian made Martin swear an oath, a solemn promise that he would never reveal the true name behind the pseudonym to anyone, not even his own wife. For decades, Martin honored that promise with unshakable resolve, even as the monument he helped finance became a global spectacle and a magnet for controversy. He claimed he would carry the secret to his grave, but why? Was it simply the professional integrity of a banker protecting a client's confidentiality, a principle so deeply ingrained it overrode all public curiosity? Or was there a more profound motivation? Some who knew Martin sensed a touch of pride in his unique role as the guardian of a great modern enigma. He was the sole human link to the architects, the keeper of a truth that thousands desperately wanted to know. To break his oath would be to dissolve his own significance in the story. Others wondered if there was an element of fear, a subtle understanding that the people he was dealing with were powerful enough to ensure their anonymity was protected by any means necessary. The public's frustration with him was palpable. Conspiracy theorists accused him of being part of the cover-up, while journalists and authors pleaded for just a hint, a single clue. They would ask, "Surely you told someone, your children, a trusted friend on your deathbed?" Martin remained a fortress. This relentless silence only amplified the central question: what name was so dangerous or so sacred that it had to be buried forever under the weight of a banker's promise? His death in 2003 did not bring answers, only a deeper silence. The secret of Robert C. Christian did not die with Wyatt Martin. It had been entombed by him years earlier, locked away in a vault of personal honor that proved stronger than granite itself. The name Robert C. Christian was a clue left in plain sight for those who knew where to look. It points directly to one of the most enduring theories about the Guidestones' origins, the Rosicrucian order, specifically the group known as the ancient and mystical order Rosicrucis or Amorc. The connection seems almost too perfect to ignore. The legendary founder of Rosicrucianism in the early 17th century was a figure named Christian Rosenkreuz, whose name translates from German as Christian Rose Cross. The pseudonym R.C. Christian is not just similar, it is a near-perfect English echo of that foundational name. This was unlikely to be a mere coincidence, but rather a deliberate signature, a nod to those initiated into the same esoteric traditions. The Rosicrucian philosophy, as laid out in their famous manifestos, centers on the idea of a universal reformation of mankind, a transformation into a new age of enlightenment, science, and spiritual wisdom. They have a long history of interest in sacred geometry, astronomy, and the construction of monuments that encode secret knowledge. The Georgia Guidestones, with their celestial alignments and multilingual call for an age of reason, fit this pattern perfectly. They are a modern, public expression of a very old Rosicrucian ideal, a stone book left for a world they hoped would eventually evolve to understand it. The theory is compelling because it provides a coherent identity for the mysterious group and a philosophical framework that explains the monument's blend of science and spirituality. Yet, for all its strengths, this theory also has significant weaknesses. The Rosicrucian order, particularly Amorc, has consistently and publicly denied any involvement in the creation of the Georgia Guidestones. While they acknowledge the obvious symbolic connection, they maintain it was the work of an individual or a separate group inspired by their teachings. Furthermore, if a large, established organization like Ambience was behind such an expensive and high-profile project, could it have truly remained a secret for so long? The logistics of design, funding, and construction would have involved many people, increasing the risk of a leak. The silence has been absolute. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either the Rosicrucian connection is a brilliant red herring, a false flag planted by a different group entirely to misdirect investigators, or it is the truth and Christian was indeed a representative of a deeply secretive inner circle within the order, operating with a level of discretion that defied its own public face. So we are left to wonder, was this the final masterpiece of a centuries-old secret society, or merely its most successful piece of inspired imitation? For many, the 10 Guides were not a hopeful vision but a chilling confirmation of their deepest fears. The call to drastically reduce the human population felt like a thinly veiled threat, a blueprint for a global genocide orchestrated by an unaccountable elite. This single directive, more than any other, became the anchor point for a powerful and enduring conspiracy theory. Critics saw the Guidestones not as a message for humanity, but as a set of commandments from a shadowy group seeking to impose a new world order, a single, authoritarian world government that would strip away national sovereignty and individual freedoms. The monument was quickly labeled the American Stonehenge of the Illuminati, a name that captured the public's imagination and fear. The historical Illuminati, a secret society founded in the 18th century, is often portrayed in modern lore as a cabal of powerful figures manipulating world events from behind the scenes. The Guidestones, with their anonymous builders and globalist message, seem to fit this narrative perfectly. Here was a physical, undeniable monument that appeared to be a declaration of their ultimate goals, carved in stone for all to see. The other guides only fueled the fire. Unite humanity with a living new language sounded like a plan to erase cultural identities and enforce a single, controlled mode of thought. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason was interpreted as an attack on religion and spirituality, replacing God with the cold, inhuman logic of a scientific dictatorship. For decades, this interpretation simmered, turning the remote field in Georgia into a pilgrimage site for both the curious and the deeply concerned. Protesters would gather, calling for the structure's demolition. Online forums buzzed with theories connecting Christian to powerful banking dynasties, globalist think tanks, and secret societies. The monument stood silent through it all, its granite face reflecting the anxieties of a world grappling with the very real forces of globalization and centralized power. Was it a warning about a potential future, or was it an instruction manual for one already in the making? This question, more than any celestial alignment, is what guaranteed the Georgia Guidestones would remain at the center of a fierce and unresolved debate for over 40 years. For the people of Elberton, the sudden appearance of the Guidestones was a bewildering windfall. At first, the massive stones brought a wave of welcome attention and curious visitors to their small town. Local motels filled up, restaurants saw more business, and the monument quickly became a quirky point of pride, a unique landmark that put their community on the map. It was their local granite, after all, crafted by their own workers. One resident might have said, "We did not understand the message completely, but we were proud of the workmanship." It put Elberton on the map. For a time, it was simply the Georgia Guidestones, a fascinating local attraction. But that initial curiosity soon curdled into something more complex and divisive. As the monument's notoriety grew, so did the nature of the visitors. The families and tourists were gradually joined by groups with a very different purpose. Protesters began to arrive, holding signs and shouting through megaphones, condemning the stones as satanic, a pagan altar for a new world order. They saw the call for a reduced population as a direct attack on human life and the emphasis on reason as a war against God. The quiet field was no longer just a tourist stop, it had become a battleground of ideas. Vandalism became a constant worry. The granite slabs were repeatedly defaced with spray paint, messages calling the stones evil or scrawling phrases like death to the New World Order across the ancient scripts. Each new act of damage required costly and difficult cleaning, a frustrating cycle for the county officials tasked with the monument's upkeep. The very permanence of the message, the thing the builders had prized, now felt like an inescapable curse to some locals. The sentiment in town began to fracture. One longtime resident might have expressed a deep resentment, saying, "We are just a small Christian community. We do not want to be associated with this. It attracts the wrong kind of people." Others felt a strange, protective fascination, acknowledging the mystery while distancing themselves from the message. Another could have admitted it was a mystery, sure, but the trouble it brought. I wish he had built it somewhere else. The stones that had once symbolized economic hope now represented a forced identity, an ideological label imposed upon them by unseen architects. Their town had become permanently linked to a global controversy they never asked for, forever trapped between a source of local pride and a symbol of dark conspiratorial fear. The pristine granite did not stay unblemished for long. Over the decades, the silent stones became a canvas for rage, repeatedly scarred by spray paint and sledgehammers. Angry messages began to appear, slashed across the carefully inscribed languages. The most common refrain was a stark warning, death to the New World Order. Other vandals targeted the first guide, splashing the word evil over the call for a smaller human population. Each act of defacement was a costly problem for the county, requiring specialized crews to carefully sandblast the paint from the delicate carvings without causing further damage. This was not random mischief, it was a targeted campaign, a physical expression of the ideological war being waged online and in protest rallies. The monument's permanence, its very refusal to crumble, seemed to infuriate its opponents even more. They were not just attacking a piece of rock, they were trying to erase an idea they found terrifying. The repeated vandalism was a clear and public symptom of a deep-seated hatred, a simmering anger that the stones represented a future of oppression and control. Every cleaned surface was a temporary victory, but the sentiment behind the spray paint only grew stronger, festering in plain sight. These attacks were a warning, a drumbeat of escalating conflict that foreshadowed a far more final solution. If the message could not be scrubbed away, then the messengers themselves would have to be silenced forever. The writing was literally on the wall, a grim prophecy in garish paint that pointed toward an inevitable and violent end. A deep boom shattered the pre-dawn quiet of Elberton on July 6, 2022. Residents for miles around jolted awake, some thinking it was a clap of summer thunder, others fearing a terrible accident on the nearby highway. The sound had come from the field holding the Georgia Guidestones. As the sun rose, the extent of the devastation became clear. Someone had planted a powerful explosive device at the base of the structure. One of the massive 20-ton granite pillars was utterly destroyed, blown into jagged chunks of rock and dust. The other slabs were left leaning precariously, fractured and unstable, a monument now turned into a death trap. The attack was chillingly precise, a deliberate act intended not just to damage but to obliterate. Emergency crews quickly cordoned off the area, and by that afternoon, county authorities made a grim decision. The entire structure was too unstable to save. In a move that echoed the finality of the bombing itself, they brought in heavy machinery and demolished what remained of the Guidestones. The 4 standing pillars and the heavy capstone were pulled down, reduced to a scattered pile of broken granite in a matter of hours. A mystery that had stood for over 4 decades was solved not with an answer, but with a sledgehammer and a controlled explosion. The field was now empty, the silent stones silenced forever. For the locals who had lived with the enigma for so long, the sudden void was profound. One day it was there, a permanent fixture on the landscape, and the next it was just a memory and a pile of rubble. The shocking speed of its end raised an urgent new question. Who hated this message so much that they felt it must not just be opposed but physically erased from the earth? The smoking crater and the jagged remains of the granite pillars were a crime scene now. Investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation combed through the debris, their work lit by the harsh glare of temporary lights. The air still carried the acrid smell of explosives mixed with the dust of pulverized stone. They quickly determined the blast was no accident but a deliberate, sophisticated act. A primary clue emerged almost immediately: security camera footage from a nearby property that captured the moment of the explosion. A sudden, silent flash that illuminated the field before the sound wave hit. The video was haunting, but it offered no clear view of the perpetrators, only the destructive result of their work. In the days that followed, the investigation found itself at a frustrating standstill, with no suspects and no credible claims of responsibility. The field itself became a grim tourist attraction, with people driving by to see the collapsed stones for themselves, to witness the physical proof that the mystery had been violently solved. Public reaction was a turbulent mix of emotions. Some felt a profound sense of relief, as if a dark cloud had been lifted from their community. Others were furious, seeing the destruction as an act of cultural terrorism, the erasure of a unique, if controversial, piece of American history. There was a palpable sense of loss for the sheer strangeness of it. A landmark that had provoked thought and wonder for over 4 decades was now just a pile of broken rock. Within weeks, county crews moved in with heavy machinery to clear the hazardous rubble. The fragments of granite, once inscribed with messages for the ages, were hauled away. The field was graded and smoothed over, returning to a state of empty, unremarkable pasture. The space where the giant stones once pointed to the stars was now just a blank slate of Georgia red clay, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder than the explosion that created it. Then, from the digital shadows, a claim of responsibility emerged. Days after the explosion, a video surfaced online, posted by a channel calling itself the Americans for Freedom. The footage was stark and deliberately theatrical. A single figure, clad in a dark hoodie with the face obscured by a digitally blurred mask, stood against a plain black background. A voice synthesizer distorted their speech into a robotic, genderless monotone, stripping away any trace of human identity. The message was a direct echo of the graffiti that had long defaced the stones. The speaker declared the group had destroyed the Georgia Guidestones to strike a blow against the global elite and their planned New World Order. They framed the bombing not as an act of vandalism, but as a righteous blow for liberty, a necessary demolition of a monument they saw as a literal cornerstone for a future tyranny. The 10 guides were not suggestions, they insisted, but a public declaration of intent by a shadowy cabal to enslave humanity. Their act was one of preemptive self-defense. The online world immediately fractured in its analysis. Amateur internet sleuths, the self-styled detectives of the digital age, went to work. They analyzed the video frame by frame, searching for background details, unique speech patterns in the unaltered audio, or any digital fingerprint the creators might have left behind. They traced the channel's creation date, which was mere hours before the video was posted, suggesting a hastily assembled front. This lack of a prior online presence fueled one side of the debate. Were the Americans for Freedom a genuine, if small, anti-globalist cell that had been secretly planning this strike for months? Or were they merely opportunistic vandals, a handful of individuals capitalizing on the monument's deep notoriety to attach their own names, however anonymously, to a historic act of destruction? The very name they chose felt like a deliberate mockery of the builder's claimed identity, Robert C. Christian, who also said he represented a group of loyal Americans. It was as if the destroyers were answering the creator's mystery with a dark reflection of their own. The group's rhetoric was a perfect mirror of the conspiracy theories that had swirled around the stones for decades, but the forensic evidence pointed toward a more mundane reality. The sophistication of the explosive device suggested some level of planning, yet the amateurish, almost cliched production of the video made it feel like a performance. This left everyone wondering, had a serious ideological group truly acted, or had the monument finally fallen to the very rage it had so long provoked, a rage given a voice and a mask at the very last moment? The official investigation into the bombing quickly hit a solid wall of silence. The remote field where the Guidestones stood offered no witnesses, and the perpetrators had chosen their moment with care, striking in the deep quiet of a Wednesday morning when the area was completely deserted. The explosive device itself, likely a commercial-grade product, left behind a signature that was difficult to trace, its components scattered and pulverized amidst tons of granite rubble. Investigators faced the daunting possibility that they were not chasing a reckless vandal, but a highly organized and disciplined group. Such a team would have meticulously planned every detail, from acquiring the materials to their escape, leaving behind no fingerprints, no discarded equipment, and no digital trail that could be easily followed. The single, anonymous video from the Americans for Freedom was a dead end, a ghostly claim from a channel created and abandoned in the same digital breath. Without a leak from within their own ranks or a lucky break, how could any agency hope to unmask them? This lack of progress led to an uncomfortable but persistent question. Was there a genuine lack of political or public will to solve this case? The Georgia Guidestones were, after all, a profoundly controversial object. To many in positions of authority, the monument was not a cherished landmark but a perpetual headache, a magnet for conflict and costly maintenance. While no official would ever admit it, some speculate that the destruction, though criminal, resolved a long-standing problem. With the primary instigator of local tension now gone, was there a silent, collective sigh of relief that diminished the urgency to find and prosecute those responsible? The case remains officially open, yet it has grown cold, another unsolved file in a world full of mysteries. The silence from law enforcement speaks volumes, leaving the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones as a perfect, unsolved crime. Its perpetrators vanished as completely as the anonymous men who first built it. The rubble had barely cooled before a new war of words erupted over the empty field. Should the Georgia Guidestones be resurrected from the debris, or was their destruction a final chapter that should remain closed? The debate split the community and captivated onlookers nationwide, pitting historical preservation against deeply held moral convictions. On one side stood those who argued for rebuilding. To them, the Guidestones were a unique artifact of 20th century American history, a physical piece of a great modern mystery. Its value, they contended, was not in endorsing its message, but in preserving a monument that provoked global discussion for over 4 decades. They saw its violent end as an act of censorship, a dangerous precedent where any controversial idea could be erased with explosives. Let the stones stand as a testament to free thought and open debate, they argued, a permanent question mark in a world that often demands easy answers. The other side viewed the shattered granite not as a loss but as a liberation. For these residents and their online supporters, the monument had been a dark landmark, a constant granite reminder of what they believed was a sinister agenda for humanity. Its destruction was not censorship but a righteous act of removal, like tearing down a statue to a tyrant. To rebuild it, they insisted, would be to dishonor the feelings of the local community that had long been forced to host a symbol many found deeply offensive and evil. Why should we be compelled to restore a monument that celebrates depopulation and attacks our faith? The empty field to them was finally peaceful. Caught in the middle was the private landowner who now faced an impossible decision. The intense scrutiny, the threat of continued violence, and the sheer cost of reconstruction weighed heavily. After weeks of deliberation, the final verdict was delivered. There would be no rebuilding. The remaining fragments of the Guidestones were quietly removed from the site, and the land was cleared for good. The mysterious time capsule plaque was pulled from the earth, its promise forever unfulfilled. The field was returned to its natural state, as if the stones and the decades of debate had never existed at all. In the end, the silence imposed by the bombers became permanent. The empty pasture now stands as a different kind of monument, one not to a mysterious future, but to a deeply divided present, and to the unsettling truth that some mysteries are not meant to be solved but erased. The land beneath the stones held its own secret, one as closely guarded as the identity of Robert C. Christian. For over 40 years, the monument stood on private property, owned by an individual whose name was never publicly revealed. This person, or perhaps this family, held a unique and silent power, the ultimate authority over one of America's most debated landmarks. Why did they agree to host such a controversial project in the first place? The original agreement, struck in the late 1970s, was likely a simple business transaction. A mysterious man with impeccable manners and unlimited funds approaches you, offering to pay handsomely for the use of a small, otherwise unremarkable patch of your land. For a farmer or a local landowner, it would have been an offer difficult to refuse, a financial windfall with the promise of bringing quiet, dignified attention to the area. They could never have anticipated the decades of protests, the vandalism, or the eventual explosion that would shatter their peace. The landowner became an unwilling participant in a global drama, their property transformed into an ideological battleground they never asked for. When the bombs finally did go off, their dilemma became immense and profoundly personal. They now possessed the scattered remains of a shattered icon. Should they attempt to rebuild, knowing it would only invite more conflict and potential violence onto their land? Or should they erase it completely, closing a painful and chaotic chapter for good? Their ultimate decision to have the rubble cleared away and the site returned to an empty field speaks volumes. It was a choice for peace, for finality, for a return to anonymity and quiet. This anonymous individual, by choosing to remove every last fragment, exercised a power that even the bombers did not fully possess. They did not just destroy the monument, they consented to its complete and total erasure from the earth. Their enduring silence, a mirror of the builder's own secrecy, adds a final, profound layer to the enigma. The story of the Georgia Guidestones is bookended by two powerful, hidden figures, one who willed it into being and another who willed its physical memory gone. In the end, the fate of a message meant to last for millennia was decided not by public consensus or historical importance, but by the private, weary decision of a single, unseen person who simply wanted their field back. Granite is not the only stone to have whispered secrets across the centuries. The human impulse to build the inexplicable is ancient and profound. Long before the Georgia Guidestones pointed to the stars, other civilizations raised monumental puzzles from the earth. Consider the great stone circles of Stonehenge on the English Salisbury Plain. Its massive blue stones were hauled from quarries over 150 miles away, an almost incomprehensible feat of prehistoric engineering. For what purpose? Generations have debated whether it was a temple for sun worship, a celestial calendar for tracking solstices, or a sacred burial ground. Its true meaning is lost to time, known only to the people who moved those impossible weights. On the remote Easter Island, the massive stone heads called moai stand as silent, brooding sentinels. Their creation required the coordinated labor of an entire society, carving and transporting statues weighing up to 80 tons across rugged terrain. Why did this isolated culture invest so much of its limited resources in such a colossal project? Was it to honor deified ancestors, to display the power of rival clans, or to mark sources of fresh water? We can only guess, just as we can only guess at the full intent of the Guidestones' architects. This pattern repeats itself across the globe, from the pyramids of Giza to the Nazca lines in Peru. In every case, a society channels its collective resources, its finest minds, and its deepest beliefs into a structure meant to endure. These are not merely buildings, they are messages. They are attempts to speak across the abyss of time, to assert we were here, and this is what we believed was important. The Georgia Guidestones fit perfectly into this timeless tradition. They are a modern echo of that same, deep-seated human need to carve a permanent mark on the world, to send a message in a bottle to an unknown future. Perhaps, like Stonehenge, its astronomical alignments were the key part of its message, a way to ground its philosophy in the universal language of the cosmos. Maybe, like the Moai, its sheer scale and anonymity were the entire point, a demonstration of power and conviction that needed no individual name attached. The greatest lesson from these ancient stones is that their original purpose is often obscured by the passage of ages. The rituals are forgotten, the languages die out, the names of the builders turn to dust. What remains is the monument itself, a riddle that each new generation must interpret for itself. The Guidestones were not up long enough to become truly ancient, but they were on that same trajectory. Had they stood for 1,000 years, the debates about Robert C. Christian and the New World Order would have faded into obscure folklore. The 10 Guides might have been seen not as a political manifesto, but as a religious text, a set of strange prophecies, or the work of forgotten gods. Their true purpose, the one their creators held in their hearts, might only have been revealed by a future civilization with a perspective we cannot yet imagine. The destruction of the Guidestones cut short that potential journey. We will never know how its message would have transformed over the centuries, or what it might have said to a world we cannot see. In silencing the stones, the bombers may have ensured that this modern mystery would forever remain just that, a question forever frozen in our own time, denied the long, slow conversation with the future it was built to have. Perhaps the ultimate paradox of the Guidestones lies in this very act of destruction. The bombers believed they were silencing a dangerous idea by shattering its granite voice, but they achieved the exact opposite. They transformed a remote physical object into a global digital story. Before the explosion, the Guidestones were a niche curiosity, known primarily to conspiracy theorists, history buffs, and the people of Elberton. The message was locked in place, confined to a single field in Georgia. The blast did not erase the words, it set them free. Suddenly, the 10 Guides were no longer just carved on stone. They were flashing across news tickers on every major network, dissected in online forums, and explored in documentaries reaching millions. The Vandals, in their rage, became the world's most effective publicists for the very ideology they despised. They proved a timeless principle that there is no fuel for an idea like an attempt to violently suppress it. The message, once anchored to a specific location, now floats untethered and immortal in the collective consciousness of the internet. It has become a ghost, more powerful in its absence than it ever was in its imposing presence. So, which held more power, the monument or the message? The stones were a magnificent, tangible vessel, a feat of engineering that demanded to be seen and touched. But the message was the soul within. The vessel could be, and was, broken. The soul, once released, cannot be put back. The silence left behind in that Georgia field is not an empty silence. It is a loud, resonant one, filled with the echoes of a debate that now, thanks to a few sticks of dynamite, will never, ever end. Today, the only physical remnants of this great mystery are not in a field but indoors under the careful watch of the Elberton Granite Museum. Here, the shattered pieces of the Georgia Guidestones have found their final resting place, transformed from a towering monument into a collection of modern relics. The most dramatic artifact is a large, jagged shard from the single pillar that was blown apart by the explosion. Its edges are rough and violent, a stark contrast to the smooth, polished surfaces that once held the 10 guides. Lying nearby is the massive capstone, its celestial alignment slot now silent, its inscribed call for an age of reason displayed horizontally for visitors to ponder up close. These fragments are no longer part of a functioning astronomical instrument, but pieces of a puzzle whose full picture is forever lost. The museum has become the unexpected and sole custodian of this physical history, a quiet archive for a story that was always meant to be told in granite and open sky. There is a profound irony in this fate. The builders intended their message to stand for millennia, weathering the elements and speaking to distant civilizations. They designed it to be eternal. Instead, its entire physical form was condensed into a few decades, and its legacy now exists only in these broken pieces, preserved under glass and museum lights. The monument that was built to defy time has been defeated by it, not through slow erosion, but in a single, violent instant. What does it mean when a message intended for the ages is reduced to a museum exhibit within a single lifetime? The silent, climate-controlled room offers no answers, only the heavy, tangible proof of a mystery that was first built in secret and then, just as decisively, erased. The violent attempt to erase the Georgia Guidestones from a Georgia field only succeeded in launching them into a new, permanent orbit. While the granite is gone, the monument now lives on with a strange and powerful digital immortality. Every angle, every inscription, and every celestial alignment was meticulously captured in high-resolution photographs and precise three-dimensional scans long before the explosion. Today, you can explore a perfect virtual replica of the Guidestones from anywhere in the world, zooming in to read the Babylonian cuneiform or tracing the sun slot in the capstone with a clarity that even a visitor to the physical site never could. This digital ghost is, in many ways, more complete and accessible than the original structure ever was, preserved against weathering, vandalism, and time itself. Online, the mystery of R.C. Christian thrives with an energy that far surpasses its physical lifespan. Dedicated forums and social media groups have become the new town square for this enduring puzzle, hosting thousands of amateur detectives, historians, and conspiracy theorists. They crowdsource information, analyze old interviews with Wyatt Martin frame by frame, and debate the Rosicrucian connection with a fervor that shows no sign of fading. New theories emerge weekly, dissecting the etymology of the name Christian or searching for hidden geometric patterns in the monument's design. The destruction did not end the conversation, it supercharged it, transforming a local landmark into a globally distributed idea. The puzzle is no longer confined to a single pasture. It lives in the collective curiosity of the internet, ensuring that the message carved for the ages will continue to be debated for ages to come, long after the last physical fragment has turned to dust. This composite portrait reveals a person of immense capability and even greater conviction. Financially, the project demanded a fortune, likely exceeding $500,000 in the currency of the late 1970s, a sum paid without hesitation through untraceable means. This was not just wealth, but liquid, disposable capital, the kind that allows for grand philosophical gestures without a second thought. But money alone cannot carve Babylonian cuneiform or calculate the precise angle to the North Star. The architectural plans were flawless. The astronomical alignments required a deep understanding of celestial mechanics, and the multilingual inscriptions point to a network of scholarly consultants. This builder, or the group he represented, moved effortlessly between the worlds of high finance, advanced engineering, and esoteric academia. So what kind of mind orchestrates such a feat? The psychological profile is perhaps the most fascinating part of the entire mystery. This was not the work of a man who desired a statue in his own likeness or a name in a history book. Every action was designed to erase the self completely. He chose a pseudonym that pointed not to himself, but to a centuries-old philosophical tradition. He used a banker as his confidant, a professional bound by a code of silence stronger than any legal contract. He commissioned a message meant to outlast empires, yet ensured no one would ever know who delivered it. This level of self-effacement is not mere humility, it is a form of ideological purity. Imagine the absolute certainty required to believe your vision for humanity is so correct, so essential, that you will spend a fortune and decades of effort to share it, yet you demand zero credit for the revelation. This suggests a person driven not by ego, but by a profound, almost messianic sense of purpose. He likely saw the Guidestones not as his opinion, but as an objective truth, a necessary set of instructions for a species he believed was lost. The secrecy was not just practical, it was philosophical. By removing the messenger, the message itself would have to stand on its own, judged not by the fame or infamy of its author, but by the stark, unadorned power of its ideas. Was he a brilliant but misguided idealist, a pragmatic futurist, or something else entirely? The empty field where his monument once stood offers no answers, only the enduring echo of a will powerful enough to build for the ages, yet disciplined enough to vanish without a trace. The story of the Georgia Guidestones has transcended its physical form to become something far more powerful, a perfect modern American myth. It contains all the essential ingredients of a story built to last, weaving together the relentless pull of a detective story with the shadowy tension of a conspiracy thriller, all anchored by a profound philosophical debate. We are drawn to the classic whodunit at its core, a puzzle with a single, enigmatic stranger and a trail of clues that leads only to a banker's unbreakable vow. This mystery then deepens into a thriller featuring an anonymous group with a radical global vision and a violent, masked countergroup that emerges from the digital fog to strike back. But the true heart of its enduring power lies in the questions it forces us to ask about ourselves. It is a story about the nature of legacy in an age of fleeting digital noise. In the 21st century, where monuments to past leaders are often reassessed and sometimes torn down, the Guidestones presented a different kind of memorial, one not to a person or an event, but to a set of stark, controversial ideas. Its power came from its anonymity. By stripping away the identity of the creators, it forced the world to confront the message on its own merits, without the bias of knowing who said it. Was this a blueprint for a rational utopia or a tyrannical new world order? The monument itself refused to answer, holding up a granite mirror to our own deepest fears and highest hopes for the future. This is why the saga endures long after the last fragment of stone was removed. It has cemented its place in American folklore not because it was solved, but because it remains beautifully, tragically unresolved, a ghost story for a rational age, a myth for our time that continues to challenge what we believe about power, secrecy, and the very purpose of a monument in a divided world. From a silent field in Georgia to a global digital ghost, the saga of the Guidestones is a journey without a final destination. We have followed the trail of a man who never existed, witnessed a message carved for the ages, and watched as that same message was obliterated in a blast of ideological fury. We have explored astronomical alignments and ancient scripts, financial veils and unbreakable vows, only to find ourselves right back where we started, staring into the same haunting void. The central question remains, echoing louder in the monument's absence than it ever did in its presence. Who, in the end, was Robert C. Christian? Was he a Rosicrucian mystic seeding a new age of enlightenment, a cold-eyed globalist plotting a depopulated future, or simply a brilliant, solitary idealist with a fortune to spend and a point to prove? The evidence points in all directions and none at all. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Georgia Guidestones is the silence it leaves behind, a powerful testament to the enduring human fascination with the unsolved. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be cracked, but stories to be carried, their power rooted in the questions they provoke rather than the answers they provide. The empty field is not an ending but an invitation, so we turn to you. After this incredible journey, who do you believe was behind this modern American enigma? Share your own theories in the comments below. Tell us who you think R.C. Christian really was and what you believe the true purpose of his stones was meant to be. The monument is gone, but the mystery now truly belongs to all of us.